Well, hello again everybody and welcome to another episode. Mirrorless cameras, with their ability to shoot pretty much any lens ever made, have opened up the world of vintage lenses from the film days in a way that no previous type of camera could. If you're new to mirrorless photography, you might be a bit confused with talk of adapters, crop factors and speed boosters, so today I'm going to make it all clear. Today I'm going to show you how to shoot any lens on any mirrorless camera. We're going to look at adapters, we're going to look at speed boosters, lens mounts and crop factors, and by the end of the video you will know what you're talking about. If you have a mirrorless camera, you might very well have a kit lens that came with it, like this one, and you can shoot these little lenses all day long and make some really nice images with them. But if you want images with maximum visual character, you're going to need a vintage lens. Of course, there are thousands of lenses to choose from, so which should you buy? Well, whichever camera you have, a good place to start is with a cheap 50mm lens from one of the major manufacturers with a maximum aperture of around about f1.8 or f2, and there are a great deal of vintage lenses available for very little money in that category. The Olympus 50mm f1.8 is a really nice lens. The Canon FD 50mm 1.8 is very nice. The Pentax Auto Takumar 1.8 is also lovely. Those are all really nice lenses, and they all will cost you around about £40 to £60 or maybe less. So start with a good cheap 50mm. Don't discount lenses from the former Soviet countries either. Some of them are very, very nice indeed. The Helios 44 is a particular favourite of mine. That's sitting on the XT1 here just at the moment. The Jupiter 8, we've got a little Jupiter 8 here. This is a rangefinder lens. It's a Sonar copy. It's a very tiny little thing, and it's a lovely, lovely lens, a 50mm f2. You could also try the Industar 61, which is available extremely cheaply. This is an f2.8 lens, and you can buy these for around about £10 to £15. So there are no shortage of starter lenses to get you going. Vintage lenses all have different mounts, and none of them will match the mount on your camera. Let me demonstrate. Here's an Olympus lens, and this is an OM Zuiko lens, some of my favourite lenses, and you can see, oops, can we see? Yes, we can see that this one has what's called a bayonet mount. These little catches will fit into corresponding pieces of metal on the camera body, and you turn it and it will lock. But that mount is unique to Olympus. Similarly, we can look at the, let's pick another one of these. Here's the Jupiter 8. You can see that this one has, I hope you can see if we can focus. Yeah, there we are. And you can see that this one has a thread on its mount. I hope you can see that. That is the well-known L39 Leica screw mount thread. So you will find that all vintage lenses have different mounts, and they're all specific to a particular camera body. So how are you going to mount them on your mirrorless camera? Well, to do that you're going to need one of, where is it now? One of these, and there's a lens already on this, and this is an adapter. So you'll have to have an adapter for each type of vintage lens that you use. This is an M42 lens, and this adapter has an M42 thread there, and it has a Fuji X mount on the other side. Let me show you more closely. So there is our adapter, and you can see on the rear face this bayonet mount. That's the Fuji X bayonet mount, and on the other end we have this M42 screw mount. So what happens is we take our lens, and this has a screw mount thread on the back here, and so we just screw them together like this. Make sure it's tight enough, not too tight, but tight enough. And we now have a lens with an adapter that will mount on our Fuji X camera. So let me show you that that is indeed so. As you can see, we've got another lens, vintage lens, mounted on here at the moment. This is the old Helios 44, a beautiful old lens. When you're unscrewing, when you're undoing your lenses, don't just turn the lens, because you're placing strain on the camera body mount. So what you should do is grip the adapter, don't put any strain on the camera body, and then turn the lens. Otherwise you're straining the mount of your camera, and that could do it some damage. However, we're not actually unscrewing the lens. We're going to take the whole thing with the adapter off the camera. So I'll put that over here, and we'll now put on our new lens the right way round. You'll see that the adapter has a little dot there, which corresponds with the little dot on the camera body here. So we put those two dots together, and Bob, as they say, is your uncle. So there's our lens now mounted on the camera. This adapter also has another function. It doesn't just fix the lens to the camera. What this adapter does is give the exact correct length that this lens will work at, because to focus properly, each lens has to sit at a very specific distance from the film, if you're using film, or the sensor if you're using a mirrorless camera. The adapter sets that distance. Without the correct adapter giving you that distance, your lens won't focus. Either you won't be able to find near focus, or you won't be able to find infinity focus. The correct adapter means you can focus right throughout the scale of the lens. You'll also notice with another adapter here, this is an adapter for Leica rangefinder cameras. You'll notice that this adapter is much smaller. So let's look more closely. So we can see there that that's a very, very small adapter. If we compare it to an adapter for SLR lenses, you can see that there is in fact quite a difference there. The SLR adapter is very much longer, probably 2 or 3 times as long as the L39 adapter for the old rangefinder lenses. Now there is a very particular reason for that, and I'll show you what it is. So let me show you actually physically on a camera what this business about distance really amounts to. So we'll take the lens off here, we'll set it to B so that the shutter stays open. And if I push the shutter button now, the shutter is now open. This is a rangefinder camera. Here is where the back of the lens would be, and through this gap here, right to the back plate there, that's the flange distance. That's the distance that the lens is designed to focus at. So it's just a little longer than the first bit of my finger there. Now if we try that with an SLR camera, we'll see that the distance is rather longer. So we'll open the shutter now. Here's the mount for the lens, and if I put my finger in there to touch the back plate, it goes quite a bit further than it did on the rangefinder camera. And in fact that's a reason why rangefinder and SLR lenses can't be interchanged between cameras. You can't shoot an SLR lens on a rangefinder, and you can't shoot a rangefinder lens on an SLR, because those distances are so very different. However, the clever thing that mirrorless cameras do is that they have a very, very short distance between the back of the lens and the sensor. It's shorter even than a rangefinder, and I'll demonstrate on the XT1 here. And I'm not going to stick my finger in there because I don't want to mess up the sensor, but hopefully you can see that that distance from this ring to the sensor there, the bit that records the picture, is very much smaller than even a rangefinder camera. The reason we can shoot any lens on a digital mirrorless camera is because it has that extremely short flange distance. So if we want to shoot any of the older lenses, we have to add distance between the lens and the sensor, and that's what these adapters do. They bring everything to the right distance, and mirrorless cameras can shoot any lens because they have a very short distance between the back of the lens and the sensor. That's why mirrorless cameras are so wonderful. So, to shoot a vintage lens, you need an adapter with the vintage lens mount at the front, your camera's lens mount at the back of the adapter, and it's got to be the right length to allow that particular kind of lens to focus properly. Adapters are available for all the common vintage lens mounts: M42, L39, Olympus OM Zuiko, Canon FD, and that's to name but a few. And there are also adapters for some of the rarer mounts, like the Exacta mount, for example, and they're all fairly cheap as well. Right, in order to shoot this lens on this camera, I'm going to need to find a setting in the menu, and that setting is usually labelled shoot without lens. And what that does is it enables the camera to, it's actually expecting a series of signals. Let me show you on here. So you can probably see those electrical contacts in the just in the throat of the camera there, just at the bottom there. So the camera is expecting signals from the lens through those contacts, and of course with the old lenses there are no electronics there at all, and it's not getting those signals. So in order to permit the camera to actually shoot, you need to turn it to the, or set it to the shoot without lens setting, and that will be there on any mirrorless camera. Very importantly, do that, otherwise your lens simply, your camera simply will not work, it won't shoot. Okay, so we've got our lens mounted, we've set to shoot without lens, and we're ready to go. Remember, all vintage lenses, or almost all anyway, are manual focus. You've got to do the actual focusing yourself. It's not easy to get perfect focus by eye, certainly just by looking at the plain viewfinder or screen, so we need some kind of focusing aid to nail focus every time, or as many times as we can. Focus peaking works really well, and I think all modern digital cameras have it. Mirrorless cameras, that is. Certainly mirrorless cameras going right back to 2015, 2014 have it. This XT1 has it, the Sony A7 has it, the little GH2 over here doesn't have it, and that is, it does present quite a difficulty when you're trying to focus. Let's see if I can demonstrate peaking to you. Okay, so as I turn the lens, you should be able to see the image begin to shimmer and glow a little as it finds the perfect focus. I think it's around about here somewhere, isn't it? Focus peaking is a really, really useful thing. It's an absolutely fantastic aid, and it really does help you to nail focus time after time after time. I've been shooting vintage lenses for several years now, and I really wouldn't have used them as much as I have if it wasn't for the focus peaking feature. It's extremely useful. Fuji uses a spoil for choice because you get lots of additional focusing aids, the best one of which, or one of the best ones, is on the XT1 here. If you look through the viewfinder and set your camera to manual focus, you'll see a little square next to the main image taken directly from the center of the main image, and it's very highly magnified, so you can see exactly when you're in focus and when you're not. You can get some really accurate focusing using that method. Peaking, though, works very well, and most mirrorless cameras have it. Certainly all modern mirrorless cameras have it, and I would imagine any camera from starting around about 2014-15 or so will also have peaking. Peaking is the mirrorless photographer's friend. Right, I can't talk about mirrorless photography without mentioning the crop factor, and very few things have caused as much confusion, so I'll explain it as simply as I can. Let's take this lens. This is a Jupiter 8 50mm f2 lens, and it has a close focus distance of 1 meter, which means that mounted on the camera it was made for, or any Leica style rangefinder like this Zorki 4, then if you turn it to its closest distance, the closest you can get and still get focus is 1 meter. Okay, that's inherent in this lens. So if you're shooting it on film, that's how the lens will behave. If you're shooting on a full frame mirrorless camera, it will also behave in that exact same way, because the full frame sensor is the same size as a piece of 35mm film. So on a full frame sensor, this lens behaves as a 50mm f2 lens with a close focus distance of 1 meter, just like it does on a film camera. The geometry is preserved. APS-C and Micro Four Thirds cameras have a sensor that is smaller than a piece of 35mm film, and that's when things start to effectively, please note that word effectively, that's when the lens's properties begin effectively to change and the crop factor emerges. The simplest way to think of it, and the way I think of it, is to ask yourself, how much of the lens is the sensor looking through? Let's just check out the lens itself. So the 35mm sensor will look through pretty much the whole of the lens, all the glass there that you can see, because the 35mm sensor is wide and tall. If you then take a camera with a smaller sensor, let's say a Micro Four Thirds sensor, that sensor will be looking through only the more central part of the lens, so it's going to see less, so the image is effectively magnified. So on an APS-C camera, crop factor of 1.5, this 50mm lens behaves as a 75mm lens that can focus down to 75 centimeters. A Micro Four Thirds sensor is even smaller. It has a crop factor of 2. So this same lens on this Micro Four Thirds camera here will behave as though it's a 100mm lens. It's actually 50mm, nothing's changed, but it behaves as 100 because it's looking through an even smaller portion of the lens, and so the final image appears even larger. And its effective minimum focus distance will be 50 centimeters. The lens doesn't change, it's just the optics. It's just how much of that glass the lens is looking through. And that's all there is to the crop factor. Now, if you are using a crop sensor camera, then what that means is, because that sensor's looking through a more central portion of the lens, what that means is you will lose, to a greater or lesser degree, the outside edges of the shot. On APS-C you'll lose about a third from the sides and the top, and on Micro Four Thirds you'll lose about a half, in fact, from the sides and the top when you compare to 35mm film. So not all of the lens's character is preserved. This Helios 44, for example, is a famous swirly bokeh lens, yet if I mount it on this Micro Four Thirds camera, much of that swirl will be lost because it loses the edges and the top and bottom of the shot. That's the same for APS-C, but it doesn't lose quite so much. Now, that doesn't bother me too much, actually. I quite like shooting a lens of about 75 to 100 mil or so it really doesn't trouble me at all. But if it bothers you, there is a way around it, and you can get all or pretty much all of the vintage lenses character onto your APS-C sensor and even onto your Micro Four Thirds sensor. And to do that, we need a special adapter, and that special adapter I have in my hand. It's a Speedbooster, or as it's sometimes called, a focal reducer, and it's simply an adapter with a lens in it. Let me show you more closely. So here is the Speedbooster. You can see from the outside it just looks like, from the side rather, it just looks like an ordinary adapter, but you can see when we look at the back, you can see there is a lens there, and you can also see there's another element here. They're coated elements, and there are at least two of them in this focal reducer. So it's an adapter with a lens in it, and what this little fellow does is to squish down the image so that all or most of it will fit onto your sensor. Now, I was quite interested to see whether the claims of Speedboosters actually they live up to in reality. So I went out and took some test shots. On the Fuji X-T1, I had this setup. That is the Helios 44 and the Speedbooster, to squish down that image and make sure we get most of, or even all of, the lens's character. And I also shot using another Helios 44 on the full frame Sony A7, and we can see actually that the Speedbooster shoots a little bit tighter, but almost, the shot is almost the same. I think there is a very small amount missing from the edges of the Speedbooster shots, but as near nothing as makes no odds. Almost all the swirl of this wonderful lens is there, so pretty much the whole of the image is there, and the whole of the lens's character is preserved. You don't lose too much of the edge of the shot. I was a little bit worried actually when I bought this Speedbooster, because it's the cheapest one on the market. It cost me about £60. I've never used one before, so I was quite keen to find out how they worked. But I was a little concerned because I thought, gosh, well, it might not be that great, and it might have some aberrations, and it might be a little bit soft. But I was pleased to find that it works really well. At least I was, until I checked it for sharpness, and there it's a different story. The centre of the image is very sharp indeed. In fact, I was quite surprised by how sharp that image is. It seems to come through those extra elements completely unchanged, possibly even a little improved. However, it's a very different story at the sides and at the corners of the shot, and certainly using the Helios 44, those sides and corners are very, very soft indeed. The Helios is, well, I mean, it's not a perfect lens, but it's not usually so soft, although the sides are less sharp than the centre. It sharpens up if you stop it down, but then we lose those wonderful swirly bokeh background blur effects that the lens is known for. I also tried using the famously sharp Carl's Zeiss Jena Pankolar 50mm on this speed booster. There's still some softness, but it is much reduced. So the center of images is very sharp, but at the sides this speed booster seems to emphasize flaws that already exist in the lens. So this isn't the best speed booster in the world, but it does demonstrate that you can get very nearly all the full frame image onto a crop sensor. If that's important to you, my advice would be to buy a good one for your most common lens mount, because of course these have only one mount. This is an M42 to Fuji X, because I've got a lot of M42 lenses and it's a very common mount for vintage lenses. But if I wanted to shoot my Zuiko lenses on here, I'd have to buy another speed booster with a Zuiko mount on the front and the Fuji X mount on the back. So buy your speed boosters carefully for the most common lens mount that you have. There is a third way though to shoot old school manual lenses, and that's to buy a new one. There are loads of really nice manual lenses coming from Chinese manufacturers, specifically made for mirrorless cameras in all the popular mirrorless mounts. Some of them are really nice and they're cheap too. They tend to be pretty fast with wide apertures. I've used the Camlan 50mm f1.1, the Niwa 35mm f1.4. I don't have those lenses anymore, I sold them on. I do have a Chinese, very interesting Chinese lens I did a video on a little while back. That's the Pergear 10mm fisheye lens. This is a very cheap, fun little lens. You can have loads of fun doing very, very wide angle shots with it. Chinese lenses are made in all the popular mirrorless mounts. They even make some in Leica M mount. I think there's an f0.95 lens for the Leica M cameras, which really must be quite something. And of course they'll mount to all the common sensor sizes too, micro four thirds, APS-C or full frame. They're very unusual, they're very innovative, and they're all very cheap as well. So that's the third way to shoot old school manual lenses. And I do think these Chinese lenses have a great deal to offer actually. They're very innovative, they're very imaginative, and you know, they're really exploring the medium in a way that other manufacturers just aren't. So there we are, 3 possible ways to shoot any lens on your mirrorless camera. Vintage lenses with an adapter using focus peaking, or with a speed booster if you want the whole of that image squished onto your sensor, or the Chinese lenses, the very unusual, very imaginative designs that are coming out of China. And of course there's no need to use an adapter with those either. So I do hope that's been of some use for those beginning and new to mirrorless photography. It's a wonderful field. You're going to have a great adventure. I absolutely love it, as you can probably tell. But for now, that's it from me. So please don't forget to like, subscribe and ring the bell before you go. And if you like the content on this channel and you'd like to help it grow and develop, you can do that at patreon.com/Zenography. As ever, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time for some more Zenography.